Do you think Iran is just bazaars, domes, and Persian carpets? Then how about a desert that people are still afraid to enter? Experienced expeditions avoid it not because of the heat, but because the ground here pretends to be solid until you stop. Or a fortress on a cliff that no one could storm for nearly 200 years, never from a distance, only from within. And in the finale, a lake awaits you, into which for centuries they threw gold, weapons, and offerings, and which has never returned a single item. Today, 5 places in Iran that repel people with something they cannot explain. The heaviest is at the end. Iran is too often shown flat, as a set of news headlines, as a tourist cliché. But if you look deeper, you are facing a territory where the past does not lie in a museum behind glass. It sticks out of salt, out of brick, out of rock. Sometimes it's a ruin, sometimes a living place that locals still do not enter after dark. And the further we move today, the stronger one feeling becomes: these places know something about you, and you know almost nothing about them. Let's start with what looks like empty space. That is why it is the most dangerous. In central Iran there is a place with no city nearby, no roads that lead there without risk. On maps it is marked as Jenn, which translates almost literally as the sands of the Jinn. Locals say this without irony. So do the travelers who have reached it. From the air, Jenn looks like just a flat expanse, rare ridges, salt flats, sand. Nothing threatening. But that is exactly what makes it dangerous. The threat here does not look like a threat. It pretends to be neutral terrain. Beneath a dense salt crust hides viscous mud that holds a person's weight only until they stop. You stand, it holds. You take a step back, your foot sinks. That is why heavy vehicles get stuck here. Trucks that drove in without reconnaissance did not always drive back out. Iranian nomads bypassed Jenn for centuries, not because they feared legends, they were too practical for that, but because the desert breaks basic navigation logic. There are no landmarks you can trust. On a hot day the horizon shimmers and multiplies, distance deceives. Researchers of the 20th century who tried to cross it recorded the same thing: people would begin to panic without warning. Not from exhaustion or thirst, from the space itself. Several expeditions turned back before reaching the center, even though they had enough water and food. One participant described it briefly: it is as if the place itself tells you that you are superfluous here. A physical explanation exists: heat warps perception, a monotonous landscape with no fixation points overloads the vestibular system, infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that deserts sometimes generate when air moves over the terrain, causes unexplained anxiety. All of this is scientific. All of it is documented. But none of these explanations help the person standing in the middle of Jenn at noon, feeling that they need to leave right now. Legends of Jinn appeared here not because someone wanted to add romance. They appeared because fear must have a name. When the ground deceives, the horizon lies, and the body reacts before the mind, a person needs a language for that experience. Sometimes that language is geology, sometimes myth. In Jenn, they coexist without contradiction. There is one story repeated in several sources with small variations. An Iranian geologist working in the region in the 1970s tried to reach the heart of the desert in an off-road vehicle. The car got stuck. He turned it around, tried another route, it got stuck again. At the end of the 3rd hour, he discovered that despite constant movement, he was almost exactly where he had started. The compass showed the right direction, the sun stood where it should, but the space seemed unwilling to let him forward. He described it not as mysticism, but as an engineering problem: the surface here is smarter than you. You think you are moving, it holds you in place. Jenn remains one of the least explored deserts in the Middle East. Not because it is impossible to reach, but because there is no reason to go there. And that feeling comes from the place itself. Few reach its center, even fewer want to return. But there are places where people returned forcibly, for years, with weapons. Where height provided the only protection against what came from below. And the next place is exactly that. The mountain fortress of Alamut stands above the valley at an altitude of about 2,100 meters. On 3 sides, almost vertical cliffs. On the 4th, the only trail, controlled by defenders. No one managed to take Alamut by force for nearly 200 years. The fortress fell once, and only because it was betrayed from within. In 1091, Alamut was seized by Hassan I-Sabbah, founder of the order that Europeans later called the Assassins. Not because they killed indiscriminately, but because they killed selectively, precisely, in places where it seemed impossible. Caliphs surrounded by guards, viziers behind closed doors, crusaders in fortified camps. Alamut was not just a fortress. It was the headquarters of the most effective system of political pressure in the Middle Ages. The threat of assassination was worth more than the assassination itself. Several rulers paid tribute to the order just to keep their names off the list. Hassan I-Sabbah spent 35 years in the fortress. During all that time, he descended to the valley only twice. Twice in 35 years. He managed a network of strongholds across Iran and Syria without leaving his room atop the cliff. The training system for Fedayeen took 3 to 8 years. Boys were selected in childhood, taught languages, court etiquette, medicine, so they could enter the victim's circle unnoticed. The most documented case, the assassination of Vizier Nizam al-Mulk in 1092. A Fedai stayed near him for weeks disguised as a dervish, struck with a dagger point blank after prayers. The guards could not react. The killer did not try to flee. This was not a failure. It was a message. Inside the fortress itself, the laws were no softer. When Hassan's sons disobeyed orders, one was executed, 2 were exiled. Discipline in Alamut was not cruel, it was absolute. In 1256, the Mongol army of Hulagu Khan approached the foot of the mountain. The Mongols did not dare attack directly, they saw the trail and knew it led to a trap. The siege lasted months. Eventually the ruler of Alamut at the time came out for negotiations and surrendered the fortress voluntarily. The Mongols entered and destroyed almost everything. The famous Alamut Library, by some accounts one of the largest manuscript collections of its time, was burned or scattered along the road. What exactly it contained is unknown. This is one of the most painful historical gaps of the Middle East. When you climb that same single trail today and step onto the platform where the walls once stood, it is not fear or admiration that works. Something else works. You look down at the valley, the river, the road along which centuries ago walked people who were not expected here, and you understand why from here you could control what was below. Not by force, not by position, by the fact that they cannot reach you, but you can. That feeling does not require historical knowledge. It simply arises. But there are places where power was not over people, but over something that a person cannot help but name, cannot measure. The next place is exactly that. And there, water works differently than you are used to thinking. Takht-e Soleyman, the throne of Solomon, this is what the place has been called for many centuries. But people lived here long before it got that name. Long before Islam, before the Sasanians, before everything that is written into official textbooks. The place attracted because at its center lay something difficult to describe neutrally. A lake of almost perfect circular shape, about 100 meters in diameter. The water in it never freezes and hardly changes temperature, equally cold in winter and summer, fed by a deep spring. Its depth by modern estimates is more than 100 meters. But in different historical periods the numbers varied, and no two sources agreed. Because no one could check. A rope did not reach the bottom. The Sasanian kings made Takht-e Soleyman the main Zoroastrian sanctuary of the empire. Here burned the great fire Adur-Gushnasp, one of 3 sacred fires that, according to Zoroastrian teaching, could never be extinguished. Kings came here before military campaigns, not for victory, but for permission. Without visiting this place, a campaign was considered unlawful. This is how space is structured, it controls not territory, but the right to act. Offerings were thrown into the lake. This is documented in several sources from different eras. What exactly gold, weapons, amulets is not known precisely. Something else is known, not a single object was ever raised from there. The lake takes, keeps, does not return. In 1256, Hulagu Khan's Mongol army swept through Iran, burning everything. Alamut fell, libraries burned. But Takht-e Soleyman he did not touch, and made it his personal winter residence. The conqueror who destroyed the caliphate chose this very place for rest. Why? No source explains. Silence where the Mongols usually left only ash. Diving expeditions in the 20th century tried several times to descend into the lake. Each time they reported a sharp drop in visibility at depth and an inability to orient themselves. The bottom has never been fully explored. Next to the lake stands what locals call Solomon's Prison, a conical hill with a void inside, a huge funnel descending several tens of meters. From the outside it is just a strange mountain. Inside, a dry well that leads nowhere. It has no utilitarian function at all. That is exactly why a legend was placed in it. Here Solomon imprisoned the demons he defeated. The terrain works for the legend flawlessly. A lake that takes and does not give back. A mountain with emptiness inside. Between them, the ruins of a temple where a fire burned that could never be extinguished. Most people who come to Takht-e Soleyman describe the same thing: the lake looks at you from below. Not you looking into it, it looks at you. This is irrational. And it works every time. From places that watch to a place that speaks, but not in words. The next stop, a ziggurat that remembers too much. In the middle of a plain in southwestern Iran rises a stepped structure of baked brick. No mountains around, no city nearby, only open space in this mass. 3 tiers, about 25 meters high today, originally almost 50. This is Chogha Zanbil, the only well-preserved ziggurat outside Mesopotamia. It is more than 3,200 years old. It was built by King Utnapishtim, ruler of the Elamite kingdom in the 13th century BCE. This was not just a temple. It was a sacred city, surrounded by 3 concentric walls. On the bricks of Chogha Zanbil, cuneiform inscriptions preserved the name of Utnapishtim and the dedication to the deities for whom the complex was built. In effect, the king signed each tier in advance. Like a man sure that his vision would outlive him and his kingdom. That is why the incompleteness here is especially hard to see. The building was conceived as a sacred center, but became a monument to a project that outlived its creator only halfway. The outer wall enclosed an area of about 1 square kilometer. Inside palaces, sanctuaries, burial chambers under the floor, a water system that collected rainwater into underground cisterns. But after Utnapishtim's death, construction stopped. The kings who followed did not want to, or could not, finish what he had begun. The upper tiers remained unfinished. Then, in the 7th century BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal sacked the Elamite capital and destroyed most of its monuments. Chogha Zanbil survived because by then it had already been abandoned and buried under sand. The Assyrians simply did not find it. For 25 centuries it lay underground. In 1935, an oil company was laying a pipeline and struck a brick. Excavation began. Gradually, from beneath layers of earth, the ziggurat emerged almost untouched, with cuneiform inscriptions on every brick, burial chambers, a canal system still partly functional. What had lain underground for 25 centuries looked as if it had been built a few generations ago. On one brick of the lower tier, archaeologists found a small indentation pressed into the wet clay before firing. A child's footprint. A child had stepped on the clay by accident, in passing, without intention. And that moment froze for 3,000 years. When you stand next to this brick, something in your mind shifts. The monumentality of the ziggurat weighs on you but remains abstract. But this trace, it is personal. Behind it stands a specific child who had a name, who was in a hurry or simply not paying attention, who did not know he was leaving something eternal, who died 3,000 years ago and never heard the word history. At that moment, Chogha Zanbil ceases to be a heritage site and becomes something hard to breathe next to. Burial chambers beneath the ziggurat are connected to the upper tiers by stone staircases that go down at an angle and end in sealed passages. Most of the chambers were looted in antiquity. By whom and when is unknown. What they were looking for is also unknown. Utnapishtim built for himself something he did not intend to leave to outsiders. And that something has long disappeared. Only the form remains, the tiers, the brick, the wind between the open platforms, and a sound difficult to describe. Not a whistle, not a hum, something in between. As if the building is breathing. Scientists explain this by the shape of the structure. Possibly. But in a place where every brick was part of a sacred machine, even a rational explanation sounds unfinished. And now the finale. A place that does not frighten or admire. It simply presses down. Because what happened there has no explanation that will comfort you. Kafari-Kuzakhstan. You have most likely never heard this name. That is, as it should be. This is not a tourist brochure place. It is ruins that Iranian historians among themselves call the place without continuation. It is located in the mountains, getting there is not easy even now. Kafari-Kuzakhstan existed. This is not a hypothesis or a legend, it is a documented fact. At different times, pottery, building remains, and traces of agriculture were found here. The settlement was inhabited for at least several centuries. Then it stopped. Not because of war, no signs of destruction. Not because of fire, no traces of burning. Not because of epidemic, at least not confirmed by bone finds or changes in burial patterns. People simply left. This is not the only such case. Iranian archaeologists have recorded a similar pattern in at least 4 other settlements in the region, abandoned in the same period, with deliberately sealed entrances. In professional circles, it is called briefly closed door syndrome. There is no official term, because there is no explanation. At some point, and judging by what remains, quite quickly, the residents gathered some of their belongings and left the settlement. They left behind pottery, structures, traces of daily life. Everything that says people lived here. And nothing that says why they left. Iranian researchers working at this site in recent decades note one detail that defies simple explanation. Several structures were sealed before the departure. Not destroyed, not left open, sealed. Doors blocked with stone, entrances deliberately closed. This is not the behavior of people who are fleeing. This is the behavior of people who are leaving and do not intend to return, but want something to remain untouched. Or want something not to get out. No one knows what exactly. When partial excavations were carried out in a few of these sealed rooms, nothing unusual was found inside except one thing. In the far chamber stood a small ceramic vessel. Intact, sealed. Inside only ash. No charcoal from a hearth, no food remains. Just ash, neatly collected and closed with a lid. Someone did this deliberately before leaving. A relic, a ritual, or a farewell unknown. But the person who did it knew they would not return. Nothing that would explain the sealing. That silence is the heaviest. Riddles with answers engage you. Riddles without answers are something else. Not interesting. Unsettling. Sometimes in working with historical sites, a moment comes when the researcher stops asking questions. Not because they found an answer, but because they understood, there will be no answer, and they must live with that. At Kafari-Kuzakhstan, that moment comes quickly. The place offers no versions. It offers only the fact, people lived here, left, closed the doors, and never came back. Jenn, Alamut, Takht-e Soleyman, Chogha Zanbil, Kafari-Kuzakhstan. 5 places that work differently. The desert that lies about its own safety. The fortress that held by absolute control over space. The lake that takes gifts and never returns them. The ziggurat on whose brick the trace of a child who died 3,000 years ago remains forever. Ruins without explanation, just sealed doors and silence behind them. What unites them? Not mysticism and not tourist appeal. They are united by one feeling that arises before each of them. A category is missing. Not frightening and not beautiful, not mysterious and not enigmatic. Something for which there is no word. And that is exactly what does not let you go after you leave. Iran is arranged so that the truest secret here is always a little deeper than you manage to see. Under the brick, a trace. Under the lake, a bottom that no one has seen. Under the cliff emptiness. Under the history, a question that is not answered aloud. That does not mean there are no answers. It means that here it is not customary to pretend that everything is explained. In that honesty, there is something more disturbing than any legend. Write in the comments which of the 5 places affected you the most. If the film was interesting, support it with a like and subscribe. The next immersion will be in a place you definitely have not heard of yet. Image prompts, English, 1 prompt per paragraph above, in the same order asterisk. Wide shot of a Persian bazaar with domes, carpets, and brassware, dusty sunlight, warm ochre and blue tones, documentary style. Desert at sunset, a lone figure standing at the edge of a sand field, long shadows, charcoal sand palette, cinematic tension. An off-road vehicle stuck in gray salt crust, wheels sinking into viscous mud, cracks on the surface, dark ominous lighting. Mountain fortress on a sheer cliff, fog below, a single winding trail from the bottom, gray and blue tones, sense of impregnability. Inside Alamut fortress, ancient stone walls, empty doorways, light from above, high contrast, abandoned atmosphere. Perfectly circular dark blue lake surrounded by barren mountains, completely still water, reflection of clouds. 5 miniatures in a grid, desert, cliff fortress, black lake, ziggurat, sealed ruins. Monochrome with deep blue accents. Satellite view of Iran without borders, only mountain ranges, salt deserts, plateaus. Cold detached gaze. Close-up of an ancient clay wall with a fossilized bone protruding from the brickwork, underlighting, eerie shadows. Village at dusk, empty streets, closed shutters, no people, a faint light in a distant hut, atmosphere of loneliness. Portrait of a narrator in half darkness, face lit from below, eyes in shadow, sharing a secret, cinematic. Drone shot of an empty salt flat, white crust with cracks, no landmarks, absolute flatness, unsettling symmetry. Map of central Iran with a blinking red spot, no cities or roads around it, ominous infographic on dark background. A dirt road ending abruptly before a salt flat, a sign in Farsi crossed out with red paint, dusty wind. Aerial view of Jenn, flat white surface, rare sand ridges, no plants or animals, monochrome. Macro shot of salt crust, black viscous mud beneath, gas bubbles rising to the surface, texture of danger. A foot stepping on the crust, cracks spreading around the sole, next shot, foot sinking ankle deep into mud. Heavy army truck stuck up to its knees, doors open, desert around, no one in sight, sense of abandonment. Camel caravan making a wide detour around the edge of a salt flat, drivers pointing at it, long evening shadows. Horizon shimmering from heat, multiple mirages, false lakes and rocks, disturbing flicker, distorted perspective. 20th century explorer in a hat with a compass, watching the needle spin chaotically, sweat on his face, tension. Expedition turning back, jeeps and camels turning around before reaching the desert center, dusty wind. Close-up of an expedition member's face, dilated pupils, rapid breathing, empty stare, unexplained anxiety. Infographic, diagram of the inner ear, vestibular system, and low-frequency waves, infrasound, black-white scientific style. Clock showing noon, a person standing on a salt flat, a long straight shadow, solitary figure under scorching sun. A person's shadow suddenly elongates and distorts into an unnatural shape, surreal frightening frame. Persian calligraphy Jinn semi-transparent over a desert photograph, ghostly effect. 1970s geologist sitting in an off-road vehicle, map on his lap, compass in hand, tense face, archival film grain. Top-down view, off-road vehicle circling on a salt flat, GPS track overlaid, circles on the same spot. Old analog compass close-up, needle pointing north, but vehicle not moving forward, sun in frame. Geologist biting his lip, staring into the endless desert, a mix of engineering bewilderment and anxiety. Modern satellite image of Jenn, white blank area with label poorly explored, red boundary line. A figure walking toward the desert center, but the camera shows the distance to the horizon does not decrease, illusion of motion. Panorama of Alamut fortress from above, pointed rock peak with ruined walls on top, green river valley below. View from below, almost vertical cliff, battlements barely visible at the top, clouds touching the summit. The only path, narrow stone staircase carved into the rock, a drop on one side, a person climbing. An assassin in a dark cloak and dagger standing in the shadow of an arch, face hidden by hood, only eyes glinting. A caliph on a throne surrounded by guards, through a window the shadow of a figure with a dagger, tension in frame. Door to a vizier's quarters ajar, a fallen cushion and a pool of blood on the floor, candle almost burned out. Map of Alamut Fortress, layout of underground passages and rooms, red markers, secret exits. Hassan Sabath sitting in a dark room by a window, looking down at the valley, old but with sharp eyes. Young Fedayeen training in a courtyard, knife fighting, jumps, acrobatics, charred stones around. A Fedai disguised as a dervish blending into a crowd near a mosque, unnoticed approach, hand with a dagger. Assassination of the vizier, panicked crowd, body on the ground, guards running, assassin calmly standing with raised hands, contrast. Inscription on fortress wall in ancient Persian, obedience is the only path, dust and scratches. Hulagu Khan on horseback looking at Alamut through a spyglass, Mongol army behind him, fog at the foot. Mongols setting up camp at the mountain base, siege towers, smoke from fires, prolonged siege, dreary landscape. Fortress gates opening from inside, an envoy emerging with a white flag, Mongol commanders waiting. Flames consuming scrolls in the Alamut library, fire bursting from windows, darkness and red reflections. Empty platform of the fortress today, wind, few tourists, a person standing at the edge looking down. View from the platform downward, river, road, tiny cars like ants, sense of height and power. Close-up of the face of a person standing on the platform, neither fear nor awe, but an elusive understanding. Takht-e Soleyman, perfectly circular lake from a bird's eye view, blue-black water. Water surface close-up, no ripples, perfect smoothness, reflecting the sky, stillness. Winter scene, snow around, water steaming but not freezing, thermal spring. Zoroastrian priest in white robes by a fire at the temple top, high flames, wind-blowing robes. A king dropping a golden goblet into the lake before a campaign, goblet sinking, ripples on water. Mongol Khan in a tent by the lake, servants bringing food, tent walls decorated with Persian carpets, surprise on his face. Hulagu Khan sitting on a throne with the lake behind him, a falcon beside him, thoughtful expression. A diver in old diving gear descending into dark water, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, zero visibility. Echo sounder screen, depth over 100 meters, no bottom, scale going to infinity. Conical hill Solomon's prison, huge funnel, absolute blackness inside, rocks around. A person throwing a stone into the funnel, waiting for a sound, silence, stone does not hit. A person looking into the lake and seeing their own reflection, but the reflection moves with a delay, out of sync. Chogha Zanbil, stepped ziggurat in the middle of a plain, 3 tiers, clay and brick, desolate. Cuneiform inscription on a brick close-up, name of King Antashnapirisha, light at an angle. Unfinished upper tier, pile of bricks, scaffolding, incomplete masonry, time stopped. Underground stone staircase descending into darkness, worn steps, a sealed door below. Clay water pipe still carrying water, a drop falling into a dark cistern. Brick with a child's footprint close-up, an adult finger for scale, touching strange trace. A child's hand touching wet clay, black and white reconstruction, sense of antiquity. Wind blowing between the ziggurat's tiers, grass swaying, visualization of sound air vibrations. Burial chamber beneath the ziggurat, empty niches, torn sarcophagus lids, traces of looters. Sealed passage in the chamber, a wall of fresh stones, not ancient masonry, someone closed it recently. Kafari-Kuzakhstan, ruins of grey stone among dry mountains, no trees, only yellow grass. An archaeologist in gloves cleaning a pottery shard from the ground, nothing remarkable around. 4 points on a map of Iran, all settlements with closed-door syndrome, blinking markers. A door in a house blocked with stones from both inside and outside, neat masonry with no signs of destruction. Open room, a ceramic pot on the floor, sealed with resin, no other items nearby. X-ray image of the pot, only ash inside, empty. A person placing the last stone before leaving, sealing a door, face not visible, only hands. A modern researcher standing before a sealed door, flashlight in hand, hesitating to enter. 5 collages in a single charcoal sand palette, desert, fortress, lake, ziggurat, ruins. Face of a person who just left Kafari-Kuzakhstan, expressionless but eyes empty. Cross-section of earth, layers, modern asphalt, medieval brick, ancient pottery, and deeper, black emptiness. A person walking through a desert, looking back, but behind them is no one, only their own footprints. White text on black background without animation. Which place affected you the most? An ancient symbol, hand with an eye, appearing in the corner of the screen for a second, like a like. Dark silhouette of the narrator turning and walking deeper into the frame, into darkness, only mountain contours on the horizon.